All right, everybody. It is 1 p.m. Central Time here on December 19th, and we have a couple of speakers today. So let's go ahead and get started. First speaker up today is Laura Edwards with South Dakota State University. And note that this meeting is being recorded. It will be posted probably at some point just after the holidays now. And there will be a poll at the end of both of our speakers today. So be on the lookout for that at the end of the hour. But up first, we've got Laura Edwards talking about the South Dakota Mesonet. Laura, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Hans. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm the state climatologist for South Dakota with SDSU Extension, based out of Aberdeen in the north central, northeastern part of the state. So happy to visit with you today, as we've just had a big blast of winter last week, and we're looking forward to some colder temperatures this week. And very timely, as I'll share a couple tools that we have, especially for crops and livestock in the agriculture sector, given some of the weather extremes that we're seeing here this week, but also for the summer season. Also talk about our South Dakota Mesonet, which is our weather station network with SDSU, that has been a base for these tools that I'll share with you today, the weather and climate pieces actually, that I'll share with you today. So thanks to Nathan Edwards and the Mesonet crew at SDSU for keeping the data running and keeping the stations going, for all the great tools we have. First of all, one of the new things that they're adding on with our Mesonet stations are cameras. And I was trying to find a summer picture that would be kind of interesting to share. And this is the one that came to mind, May 12th, 2022. This was the derecho that went through eastern South Dakota on that day and caused quite a bit of infrastructure damage. Our tower, or the tower of the weather station, survived, and this is one of the pictures that they took, as they had a camera taking a picture every minute during this time. So really, we're catching some really cool stuff here, all seasons of the year. As far as the Mesonet goes, I'm going to share some information about the network first. And their goals are for monitoring, particularly moisture extremes, flooding first, and that's what's motivating a large expansion of Mesonet stations across the region. And so they're looking at trying to measure total water balance. Their network plan in the upper Missouri River Basin includes 540 stations, either upgraded or new installations in that river basin. Just over 150 of those in South Dakota, as the Missouri River Basin covers most of our state except for the very far northeastern corner. About 18 of those are in tribal lands in South Dakota. They're also targeting lower elevations, measuring moisture on the plains, as that has been a large unknown quantity, or not well understood quantity as far as driving flood in particular. Some examples of that were 2011, the Missouri River flood of that year, and then again in 2019. And so obviously one of the objectives here is to improve flood forecasting for this region. When the network's all built out in just a few years, 4 or 5 years, I expect, nearly every South Dakotan will be within about 20 to 25 miles of a weather station, and SDSU will be collecting 1 million data points per day of all the observations that they take across the network. Here's a map of the basin of the region of interest here. You see the white areas, including the Black Hills. That's a higher elevation area, so not as interested there. Same with some of the higher elevation headwater areas in Montana and so on. And you can see the grid spacing that they're trying to work with here as far as spacing out stations across the region, more or less evenly spaced. So really quite a large undertaking, and a multi-state partnership. Again, Nathan Edwards, I credit to really making this happen and getting all the other partner Mesonets on board to develop this network that will be one of the first in the country to look, or if not the first in the country to capture all the data that they're collecting here in this way. So here's a map of the current deployment of stations across South Dakota, just over 40 stations statewide. And some of these have been in the ground for quite a while and have had about 30 years of record already. Some of them were just newly installed in late October, about a half dozen of those. So, but some of them I'll show you have some of the older equipment still, and some are the upgrade. I'll show you the difference there. The website mesonet.sdstate.edu is right at the top, and that's where you can find all the data and information from the weather network. Here's what one of the older stations looks like. This was located at the Sturgis Research Farm. And yes, that's the same Sturgis where the motorcycle rally is, out in western South Dakota. At that time, the older equipment had 5-minute updates. We had 4-inch bare soil temperature there. We had deployed inversion thermometers, and I'll talk about that for pesticide application and drift. But you see the primary thermometer is here in the middle, and then there's an upper one and a lower one. And these towers, these stations are only about 10 feet tall, about 3 meters tall. So that's a relatively short distance between those, but we're trying to measure inversions, temperature inversions right near the ground for ground applicators. And so that was deployed mostly with support of South Dakota soybeans. I appreciate their support there, in addition to the other Mesonet stuff that's supported by other partners. Everything is operated on a standalone system with solar power and cell phone communication, so you don't need to run wires and communication lines out there for power or communications. So they're freestanding. You also see an anemometer, solar radiation sensor. There is a rain gauge, you just can't see it in the picture here at that time. And this is the old, what I call anyway, the older style of a weather station, which is what a lot of folks have across the country in similar networks. With the new upgrade and expansion, they're still continuing a 5-minute data for the weather data. Wind speed and direction is still measured and reported, but we're now looking at 10-meter towers instead of 10-foot towers. Air temperature, again, still being measured. And you can see that right above one of our faculty members' heads over here. Atmospheric pressure, precipitation, I'll talk about solar radiation. We're also measuring soil temperature and moisture, and I'll go into a little more detail about that because we're measuring at 5 different depths for that. Inversion temperature still is being monitored, but again, there's different heights now with the taller towers, and then they added webcams, as I shared you the picture from Brookings from the derecho. So the precipitation now is really one of the biggest investments in the new equipment, and that is a all-season precipitation gauge that measures both rainfall in the summer and also the liquid equivalent of snowfall in the winter. So we can get total water essentially from this precipitation gauge, where essentially it measures it melts the snow and weighs it. So we get a really good number for year-round precipitation in our climate with all 4 seasons here in South Dakota. This picture here on the right that you see is from a ribbon cutting that they had to celebrate this expansion and upgrade. And so this was in late August of this year at Sioux Falls, which is a partnership with the City of Sioux Falls, Game Fish and Parks Department, and South Dakota Mesonet at this location. You see our governor and one of our senators was present, our university president, and a number of other dignitaries there celebrating the expansion of our Mesonet. Here's what one of the new stations look like. That previous picture showed you a little hint of that. So here's that 10-meter tower, much beefed up solar panel system, cameras, and including the snow depth sensor over here, downward pointing at a white board, and I'll show you another picture of that. This is that rain gauge with these deflector shields on there, the ultra shields. That measures rain and snow, and of course beefed up power systems and all that to survive through the long winters here with the shorter daylight days that we have here in our northern climate. So really, they've invested quite a lot here. So to get into some of the tools, this is one I'll spend probably least time on, the small grains disease tool. This is one we've that's been with the Mesonet for quite a while, maybe close to 15 years now, 10 to 15 years, looking at small grains disease. This is in partnership with our plant pathologist who was on staff at the time. And so this is using Mesonet data. And again, you can use any station in the state. You choose your location. Dakota Lakes is just one that was there. That's kind of in the middle of the state there. And it gives you a possibility of some different diseases that could be impacting small grains, mostly wheat, winter wheat or spring wheat, using that historical data and then a model that sits behind it. So here's first we're looking at tan spot, leaf rust, those kinds of things. And you choose, this is a static image, but when you go to the tool here, you can choose what growth stage you're at, flagging, heading, what have you. And granted, I just captured this, so there's nothing growing at this point here right now. But it gives a recommendation, consider a fungicide when the bar graph has passed the colored backgrounds that indicate 6 to 8 days of risk. So you're looking at how many days, consecutive days, have reached kind of that warning level there. And there's an extension article or fact sheet that goes along with this as well. Another way to look, and then another disease that the same tool will kind of give you a scouting heads up about is Fusarium head blight or scab for wheat. And so this is, again, winter wheat or spring wheat. You'd already choose your location earlier in the tool, and then you choose winter wheat or spring wheat, and based on the developmental stage that you had chosen earlier, that then it gives you a risk of when scab may be more or less likely. And so using the stoplight color system of red, yellow, or green, and then you have it crossed with the dates on the left-hand side. So looking at kind of historically, so you see kind of a few or several days in a row where you have high risk or high susceptibility, maybe that's a time to go out and apply a fungicide to that crop. So this tool, like all the other tools I'll share, are getting updated with the new stations that come in. They get added into the model with the weather data that's being collected. So all the new stations have this capability as they come online. I should have said earlier, I neglected to say this, when you go to the Mesonet website, they have a menu at the top right. And when you look at tools, that's where most of these things will show up there. So moving on to one of our more popular, or probably the most popular tool that we have on the website is a spray tool for pesticide applicators. This is good for both private and commercial applicators. And we share this a lot at our winter meetings for pesticide recertification and training classes and so on. We developed this tool in part, not solely, but in part due to the marketing, or when dicamba came on board and became available for over-the-top application in soybeans. And inversions were one of the factors that are listed on the label as far as avoiding inversions, right? For avoiding a risk of drift. And so in 2016, we actually did a little study looking at what's the inversion potential by the hour of the day, looking at kind of the key season of May, June, and July. This was looking at our South Dakota Mesonet stations that we had at the time. And on the left here are the number of days inversion for each one of those months. Each one of those months has a different color: May in orange, June in gray, and July in the yellow color. And then you look at midnight to midnight through the bottom. Oops, sorry, through the bottom of this plot. The gray shaded areas are essentially nighttime from sunrise to sunset. The yellow is roughly that first hour of the day. So based on our weather station data and thinking about pesticide application, we found that inversions are very common in the overnight hours here, and that, you know, taking account for that first and last hour or so of the day to avoid those times are really beneficial to avoid inversions. And that was data in 2016. We've collected the similar data since then. 2017 was similar in 2018. So I'm just showing this 1 year for now. But so that was kind of a point that we were trying to scientifically, you know, measure using the Mesonet. And we also did other things like looking at how many sprayable hours, looking at different stations, especially in eastern South Dakota where we have more soybean acres. How many sprayable hours could we have? Looking at the different labels when they changed the labels from 2017 to 2018 and how restrictive that was. And so we saw an opportunity here for weather data from the Mesonet. And so we developed the spray tool, which I know doesn't have a super creative name, but it describes what it is. So here we are at mesonet.scstate.edu/spray, or you can access it through the tool menu on the home page. And so we looked at, first of all, look at this first block here, temperature and humidity in the top right. This is current conditions based on the 5-minute weather data from the Mesonet. Obviously not today, but one example. So temperature, you've got humidity, dew point. We've also added in delta T, which is not frequently used, but is more common in some applications. And so we use delta T as well to kind of give an estimation or a perspective on droplet lifetime, kind of relating to temperature and humidity combination. And then temperature inversions, you know, what's your drift potential here? So, and we have these color dots. You might wonder what that is. So we have actually red, yellow, and green dots, kind of like a stoplight system in an advisory capacity. You know, we can't tell anyone, you know, go or no go, but looking at some individual parameters, we have some advisory criteria of red, yellow, and green. And so this color here is red in this box because the inversion is red. We have an inversion in place. And this color will change red, yellow, or green depending on what the weather conditions are. Similar here in the wind box here, we have wind direction, wind speed, which is measured at the sensor, wind gust as well, and boom height wind speed, which also became one of the new kind of weather elements that folks needed measurement of for their dicamba applications in particular. And here again, you have the color dots for red, yellow, green. And in this case, wind speeds were maybe in the marginal category where you're starting to inch up into an average wind speed that's maybe on the higher end of the recommended range. And so we took very conservative ranges for this, and I'll show that in the next an example in the next slide. We basically took, what the dicamba labels are, because they're among the most restrictive we could find, and essentially closely followed what those weather criteria would be. Sunrise, sunset, again, important for some record keeping applications. And so we were able to secure an agreement with the State Department of Ag and Natural Resources that the weather data from the Mesonet are accepted by the state for their official weather record keeping. So that was a great advantage to pesticide applicators across the state, because they could use not just airport data, but they could use high quality data from the from SDSU, from the Mesonet as well. So they wouldn't rely so much on backyard weather stations or handheld sensors and those kinds of things. We have a couple of help buttons here, and these are some examples of the red, yellow, green that I was talking about. So on the left, we have the inversion criteria, red, yellow, and green, and we explain kind of what might be some observations associated with those measurements. Similar here on wind speed on the right, wind speed, both the average wind speed at the height of the anemometer, the wind sensor, and then we use the EPA formula to calculate or estimate boom height wind speed. So we don't actually directly measure the boom height wind speed, but we use the EPA formula or calculation to estimate that based on what our wind speed is higher up on the tower. We also have it in map format, so you can look at an individual station, but also look at maps of inversions across the state. In the winter, we don't see, this is from actually this morning. In the summer, it's really cool when you have a clear, calm day and inversions are going to come in place. It's really cool to watch the sunset all the way across the state. It takes about a half an hour or so. And you'll see a lot of these sensors go flip towards inversion, and then in the morning they flip back when the sun comes up and heats up and breaks up that inversion. So really cool kind of things to see here on the Mesonet website with the spray tool. We've in 2021, following the COVID pandemic, that winter 2020-2021, we converted our pesticide training to online or hybrid format, and we saw a huge jump in user statistics and visitors of the spray tool. So in this case, I know there's kind of a mixed feelings on online or in-person programming and extension, but we found a huge benefit to users of this tool across the state. And I think that will even grow more as we continue to get more stations installed across South Dakota. So from 2020 to 2022, we saw almost over a 40% increase from year over year in page views. And our peak month is June all these times, but this June was 50% greater than the previous one. So we're getting quite a bit of increased usage. So it's becoming one of our most popular tools. We also have the ability to email a spray record or a weather record to a sprayer, to a pesticide applicator if they want. So instead of taking screenshots and things like I shared with you, they can enter the day and the time and the location, and it will send them an email. So they have that on file as well. And so we've also seen a doubling of increase of folks from 2020 to 2021. Again, I'm sure a result of our online and hybrid programming that more people across the state were able to access and use these tools and found out about them. So livestock stress tools, where I'll spend the last few minutes here. And this is one we've had, about 5 years or so, no, 3 years or so, in coordination with Dr. Warren Rushi in animal science. And so he identified the Comprehensive Cattle Index, or CCI, as the measure of environmental stress on livestock. And so this was originally developed by Terry Mader at Nebraska, and then Warren found that this was pretty pretty good for South Dakota. And so it uses temperature, humidity, wind speed, and solar radiation. So looking at all of those factors, and Dr. Mader had identified risk categories based on that weather information for both extreme hot and extreme cold conditions. So that's what's really useful about this. The cold stress side of it was divided into newborn and adult classes, adult being those maybe have acclimated more to weather conditions. This is not to replace the National Weather Service and their cold advisory for newborn livestock. I know some of the Weather Service offices, forecast offices in this region offer that CANL tool, cold advisory for newborn livestock. This does not replace that. Their place for that is an excellent forecast tool. Here we're looking at animals already basically on the ground. The livestock stress tool, we also display wind chill index, heat index, and THI, or the temperature humidity index. Mostly, farmers and ranchers are familiar with that, but also supports farm service agencies' livestock indemnity program should there be a loss, a death loss of cattle as well. So that's partly why that is shared and people are more familiar with that. So here I'm grabbing some current data, and it's cold here in South Dakota today. So looking at the comprehensive cattle index for newborn livestock, you can see on the right, those are the options you have, the CCI for newborn, adult, and then the wind chill index or heat index, and then the THI, the temperature humidity index. And so here where you have a lot of purples and reds, purple is the most severe category that we have. And certainly it's not a great day to be a newborn cattle, a new calf today. On the adult side, again, this is for current for this morning at the same time that I took that screenshot for the newborn livestock. And so you can see when they're acclimated animals that the category colors are not as extreme, and I'll show some examples of the color thresholds in a little bit. So you're seeing more in the oranges to yellows. Certainly cold out there, but maybe not as life-threatening cold as it would be for newborn. You can also look at individual stations. So here I took a station just east of us here in Aberdeen. So this is a station at Groton, South Dakota. And the top is the newborn livestock. And you see a solid jagged line, and that's what we've measured so far. And the background color here is purple. We've seen the extreme danger category, back for a few days. And then you see this dotted line, and that's a forecast using high resolution forecast data from the National Weather Service. So we don't create our own weather forecast, we just use their information and then calculate the CCI based on the weather forecast. So you can look out, about 2 days or so to anticipate and hopefully prepare for extreme cold or extreme hot conditions. Similar here on the adult side, and here you can see where you have some different colors of shading from yellow in the moderate, orange severe, red extreme. The lower you go, the colder it is, and all the other factors that go into play there. And so again, you see the historical index and then the forecast index. What's really cool about this is that Warren and I, for example, earlier this year, were able to share in anticipation of extreme heat event. Hey, look at the livestock stress tool, see what the forecast is for your area. This may be a time to start making preparations to prevent, the worst stress or worst loss in your cattle herd. And so we also have these graphs for each station for wind chill index or heat index, depending what season you're in, and the THI. So very similar to what I showed you earlier with the CCI. So a couple of the things, we also have a lot of ag weather stuff out there, looking at evapotranspiration for different crops, corn and grass in this case, comparing to average, comparing to rainfall. So you look at the moisture deficit between evapotranspiration and rainfall. For example, this was from Brookings from this year. We also have some cool visualization looking at individual rain events in the purple. This is from Brookings from August of this year. Looking at individual rain events and what's a soil moisture response from each of those events. And so you can look at the purple lines, and then the soil sensors are at 2, 4, 8, 20, and 40 inches there on the left scale. You can see the colors of each sensor at different depths responding to that moisture. So that's really helping us a lot in monitoring drought and how soils are responding to precipitation and how fast they're drying out as well. Speaking of soil moisture, our favorite map, I think, for soil moisture is what we call the poker chip map, where we have a stack essentially of chips representing each of the soil moisture measurements at depth. And so pretty fun way and informative way, I think, to get a quick snapshot of which areas, which depths are drier or more moist across South Dakota. Because we have all these sensors, we're also looking at frost depths as we're in the cold season. And new, we have snow depth, which is moisture, the depth of snow with our new sensors. And so you can see, I think our winter right now is 23 inches here at Highmore, but we have had a lot of snow here the last week. So all of that is basically new snow. And just some cool pictures looking at the sensors. You can see the snowboard here with the ruler, and our webcam is able to help us kind of QC and see, wow, is our snow sensor really indicative of the area, or is it getting scoured out, things like that. And here's where we could diagnose some issues where we have some icing on this weather station and some hoarfrost on it. So cameras are helping us a lot, not just to look at the area around it, but also to help troubleshoot when we have issues. So yeah, and here's another one that has some icing on it as of today. So anyways, I wanted to share Nathan Edwards is the Mesonet guy. If you have any questions, want to reach out to him, and I'll leave my contact information up for just a second while Aaron is getting ready to go. So thank you for your attention today.
I think we've got time maybe for just one question. If anybody has anything they'd like to ask, please enter it in the chat. And at this time, I am going to stop recording. So if you are watching the recording, you just should have been there.